March 15th, 44 BC. It's morning inside the elite villas of Rome, where 60 men are checking their sleeves. They aren't hiding their coins, they're hiding daggers, because back in those days, the Roman elite needed to chill out. Over the past 20 years, Julius Caesar had rapidly risen to power and became the most powerful man on earth. And soon, he would be a corpse. His murder was not from a spontaneous riot or a typical political dispute. This was a cold-blooded, calculated betrayal unlike any the world had seen. It was the culmination of months of overreacting, 60 irrational senators all feeding off each other. Some were Caesar's best friends, beneficiaries to his will, but it took more than wine for 60 civilized men to commit this murder. How did they justify plunging their knives into Caesar's flesh? If just one of them had shown reason, could they have stopped their madness? To the average Roman, Caesar was a hero. He had ended civil wars and filled their warehouses with grain. But to the Senate, Caesar was a jailer who was becoming all too powerful. One of Caesar's virtues was clementia, a reference to the Roman goddess of forgiveness and redemption. When Caesar would defeat his enemies, he forgave them. He gave them back their lands, their titles, but in Roman honor code, this was a death sentence. They could only be forgiven by someone who had power over them. By showing mercy, Caesar was proving he was their master. Every time they sat in the Senate, they felt that debt. They felt the burden of Caesar owning their lives, taking their names, their legacy. He was bypassing their votes as they became his own puppets. The 600 most powerful men in the world were becoming Senate decor. As they lost their power, they were also losing their identity. Caesar acted like a king, but refused the crown just to mock them. The Senate became a pressure cooker with the lid taped shut. They were humiliated and desperate to find a solution. But an angry man is just a loud voice. To kill a god, you need a circle of trust that no one can break. And that is where the real conspiracy begins. This wasn't just a political disagreement. This was textbook group polarization. When you discuss ideas with only like-minded people, your ideas don't stay the same. They become more extreme versions of themselves. The elite sat in an echo chamber which distorted reality, and every senator wanted to prove he was the truest lover of the republic. If one man suggested a protest, the next had to suggest an attack. To prevent this radicalization, they needed to discuss opposing thoughts. But to suggest anything less than those around you showed weakness, which was a death sentence for one's honor. To make things worse, lead conspirators like Cassius Longinus controlled the flow of information. The group only saw one set of facts. They were blinded and truly believed the streets of Rome would erupt in cheers after Caesar's death. They had talked themselves into a corner where murder was their only logic. But even with a radicalized group, you still need a trigger. You need a deadline. And Caesar had just given them one. The date was fixed, March 18th. In just 3 days, Caesar was scheduled to leave Rome to lead a massive military expedition to Parthia. Caesar knew the Senate was a nest of snakes, and he wanted to get back to the battlefield where he felt safe. For the conspirators, this was the ultimate nightmare. If Caesar conquered Parthia, he would return as a literal god. He would be invincible, and no senator would ever dare touch him again. The Republic would not just die, it would be buried. They had 72 hours to save their world or lose it forever. But there was still one final mental hurdle to clear. They were about to kill a man they all called the father of their country. To do that, they needed more than just daggers. They needed to switch off their own humanity. So how could these senators justify a murder and bypass any guilt? To kill a friend, you have to stop seeing them as a person. You need to flip a series of mental switches that allow a good person to do a terrible thing. Moral disengagement allowed them all to commit to murdering their emperor. To do this, they did not say murder and instead called it liberation. By reframing the act as a service to the state, guilt was replaced by pride. In their secret meetings, they dehumanized Caesar. They stopped talking about him as a man and instead labeled him as a beast or a cancer. Because you don't murder a cancer, you eradicate it. But who was going to kill the beast? Because if one man kills Caesar, he is the murderer. So that's why over 60 men were involved. In their minds, the group killed Caesar, not the individual. So the switches were flipped. Their humanity was gone. All that was left was the logistics of the strike. 10 a.m., March 15th. Caesar's wife is begging him to stay home, since she had dreamed of his body bleeding out on the Senate floor. Since Caesar is superstitious, he is ready to cancel the meeting. But the 60 conspirators are already at the theater, clutching their daggers, sweating through their togas. If Caesar doesn't show up, the plot dies today. The conspiracy is seconds away from failing. Then, the ultimate betrayal happens. Caesar's closest general, Decimus Brutus, arrives. Decimus laughs at the dreams and tells Caesar the Senate is waiting to crown him. He plays on Caesar's one weakness, his pride. Caesar stands up, puts on his toga, and walks out the door. As he moves through the streets, a man named Artemidorus pushes through the crowd, handing Caesar a small scroll. Inside is a complete list of every conspirator and the details of the hit. Caesar takes it, but the crowd is pressing in. He's distracted and doesn't open it. He unknowingly holds the key to his own survival in his hand, but he keeps walking. At 11 a.m., Caesar enters the theater of Pompey, and the senators stand as a sign of respect. It is all a choreographed lie. They surround him, pretending to present him with a petition. Tillius Cimber grabs Caesar's toga, pulling it from his shoulders. This is the signal. Casca strikes first, grazing Caesar's shoulder. For a split second, Caesar fights back like the soldier he is. Then, 60 daggers emerge from 60 togas as they swarm in a frenzy. They are so desperate to share the guilt that some of them stab each other by mistake. As Caesar sees Brutus, his protege, with a knife, he stops fighting. He covers his face with his toga and falls. The man who conquered the world is now just a pile of bloodied wool. The room is silent as 60 men stand over a single body. Brutus steps forward to give a speech, expecting cheers from the people who they had just liberated. But when he walks outside, there is only screaming as the public is terrified. The conspirators convinced themselves that Caesar was the problem, but they were wrong, and the Republic was already dead. Caesar was just the only man keeping the lights on. Removing him brought back 13 years of civil war, where millions of Romans would die in the chaos. If they had discussed just one opposing view when planning the murder, perhaps Caesar and the Republic would have lived. But they didn't, and the men who thought they saved the Republic were the ones who finally killed it. This is Mind Your History, where we explore the mind behind the moment. Next time, we look at the minds within the Federal Bureau of Investigation and their mismanagement of the crisis at Waco, Texas. Subscribe to see how institutional ego led to the disastrous end of a 51-day standoff.